and we will get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the K-12 Blackboard Innovative Teaching Series. This is our first fall session for 2016. We're really excited to have Julie Evans with us, presenting Digital Learning Trends, Making an Impact on Student Engagement and Development. My name is Katie Gallagher. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for Teaching and Learning here at Blackboard. I want to thank Sue Coons from our Client Success team who's joining me today to help us out in the chat. We appreciate all of you attending, and we're always open to new ideas for the series, so please feel free to reach out on Twitter or by email to send us your suggestions or let us know if you'd like to present for a future session. All of the sessions in the series are recorded, and you can find them at tinyurl.com/bitsK12. I also share each of these sessions in our community site, and we have a K-12 professional, Blackboard professional learning community that I invite you all to join. Your follow-up to this session will include a link to join this PLC, and it's a way to create an ongoing dialogue outside of these sessions, especially for those of you who enjoy these sessions on demand on your own time, a way to connect all the participants and experts in the series. We have a lot of great sessions coming up. We have 9 sessions scheduled this fall. The next one is next Monday the 26th at 3:30 with Klein ISD from Texas, so we hope you join us next week as well. And we're really happy to have Julie Evans with us. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Project Tomorrow, and I'll pass it to Julie so you can further introduce yourself, but we're really excited to have you kicking off the fall series and sharing your latest research.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. I'm very happy to be here. As I tweeted out earlier today, this is one of my favorite webinar opportunities of the year, and so I look forward to being part of this series. The series looks great, folks, and so even beyond today, please take advantage of this fabulous professional learning opportunity that we have here. So let me go ahead and get started here. We are going to be talking about digital learning trends, and I'm going to be sharing with you a specially curated set of data findings from the Speak Up 2015 research project. Now, whether you're familiar with Speak Up or not, I'll share a little bit of information about that with you in just a couple moments. But in particular, what we're going to be looking at is digital learning trends through the lens of what type of impact does it have on student engagement, the development of college and career-ready skills, and also how does that actually look on the ground in schools and districts today. So as we go through this, you may very well have some questions that come up, and we're looking forward to hearing from you or comments or your ideas as well. So I do want to thank Blackboard again for inviting me to be here. So thank you so much, Katie, and to everybody else on the team. And of course, if you are Twitter friendly or would like to share some of this through social media, please feel free to do so. I also included, in addition to Blackboard's handle, our Speak Up Ed handle, which is the handle that's associated with the research, as well as my personal one as well. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is, as I mentioned, I'm going to be sharing with you some information about the key digital trends that are impacting student learning. We're going to look at how, as I said, on the ground, how schools and districts are responding to these trends. Are they embracing them? Do they still see obstacles? Do they still have some challenges associated with it? And then we'll close out by talking a little bit about the future of digital learning. What are some aspirational views of students, of parents, of teachers, of administrators, and what does that look like for the future going forward? And then, of course, as I mentioned, we'll leave time for your questions, ideas, and comments at the end. Though, as Katie and I discussed previously, if you want to go ahead and share those in the chat box while we are talking, that would be totally fine as well. Look forward to your ideas as we're going forward. Okay, so starting at the 50,000-foot level, really a significant finding from our 14 years of doing this research on digital learning trends is this one, which may surprise you or may not. We actually see a lot of agreement among students, teachers, administrators, and parents that we need a different type of learning experience to make sure students are well prepared for the future. You know, we've had lots of conversations over the last couple of years in the education sector about college and career-ready skill development, around developing students' capacities for what the needs are of the future workforce, not the workforce of the past. How do we help students be prepared to take advantage of all the different resources and opportunities that are out there for learning, as well as for their future success? And so this idea that there is agreement that we need a different type of learning experience is actually a pretty significant finding for many folks. Now, we've been looking at digital learning trends, as I mentioned, for the past 14 years, explicitly through the Speak Up Research Project. And there's a couple things that I think are interesting to sort of ground our conversation here today. These are, again, some of these high-level trends that we're watching. You know, as I mentioned before, this idea of college and career-ready skill development, are we college and career-ready? Those type of conversations. Increasingly, we see that parents as well as educators are connecting digital learning to this opportunity. So the idea that digital learning is in fact a way to help students develop those type of skills. However, we're finding at the same time that really it's about the learning experience. So less about the technology per se than it was in the past, and more about what is the impact on student learning, what is the impact on the outcomes of student learning. Now, going part and parcel with that is this idea of, well, what are the best tools for us to use? And so increasing interest at the administrator level as to how we evaluate quality. Do we have equitable distribution of our digital resources? And that, of course, then brings new stakeholders into the decision-making process. Now, in many cases, these new stakeholders not only have different ideas about how to measure outcomes and results, but some of them are very frustrated, or at least increasingly frustrated, with the slow pace of change that they're seeing in the classroom. Some of those new stakeholders may be new digital parents, so parents that have grown up with technology or been more technology friendly, maybe than parents of students that are older, and thus have different expectations. This idea of the frustration around slow pace of change also has to do with the fact that we have a wide distribution of skills and capacities in our classrooms with our teachers today. And so this idea of how to think differently about professional development and professional learning is a very interesting conversation, and one that we're seeing increasingly happen in schools and districts as well. And then this idea of new classroom models, and lots of different conversations about new classroom models being held all around the country, and we're going to talk about some of those today. But this idea that there's a greater focus on personalization of the learning process enabled by digital tools, content, and resources. But this idea that personalization is really the outcome that we're looking for. And it's not just about a new type of learning experience, but really a learning experience that's more personalized. Now, I happen to love this particular quote from Sir Ken Robinson, and so I wanted to share it with all of you. It may be one that you're familiar with and you carry with you as well. And so this conversation around standardizing education, Sir Ken kind of puts on its ear and says it's really to personalize and customize the needs of every child and community. And then I love this particular part where he says there is no alternative, and in fact there never was. So this idea of personalized learning as being something new or unique or different isn't really true, but now we actually have the tools in place to help make that possible. And maybe that's what the new awakening is, or the new idea is at this point. The other thing that's key to this conversation is also to understand that for today's students, they actually have a definition of personalized learning. So they've been thinking about this for a while. I think one of the great treasures is when we have the opportunity to talk to students about how they would like to experience learning. And we see that coming up in our Speak Up research data. I'm going to share that with you, obviously, in just a couple moments, but also in many of the other work that Project Tomorrow does. And so we've catalyzed this into a pretty simple definition of what that student vision is for personalized learning. Simple to understand, a little bit more difficult to implement, of course. So for today's students, they're particularly interested in learning that is socially based. And that it goes beyond just communications. It's actually much more about collaboration, partnerships, peer learning, the idea of learning from experts that are outside of their immediate learning community, let's say. We also see that for today's students, they are interested in expanding those bounds beyond their learning community, and that's where this idea around untethered learning in particular that is not tethered or bound by what might be limitations in their school resources, their community resources, even in the knowledge of their teacher around a particular topic. And in many ways, today's students are ahead of the curve for some of us in terms of thinking about their learning experiences transcending the physical boundaries of a school or a district or a community. And then the final component of this student vision for personalized learning is really around this idea of digitally rich learning, providing context and relevancy to the learning process. Quite often, and you'll see it here in the data in a moment, we talk about digital learning as being around engagement. Students are more engaged in the learning process when there's digital tools, content, or resources that are part and parcel of that experience. I will clue you in here, folks, that the students shine us on a little bit about this engagement piece. They believe in the value of the engagement, but they're particularly interested in the use of digital tools to support relevancy and context, as I mentioned. They want to understand where the world of learning fits in with all the other worldly experiences that they're having, particularly those that are online. And so the idea of connecting the dots amongst seemingly disparate parts of their learning environment is a key component of this student vision. So I'll be talking about the student vision as we go through some of the digital learning trends that we're going to be examining, but keep these in mind as we're having this conversation today. And I would love to hear more on your thoughts on the student vision for personalized learning as well. So what I did is put together a specially curated set, as I mentioned, of Speak Up research data for you. We're going to look at usage and role of digital content from both the teacher perspective as well as the administrator perspective. And then look at what the impact is of new classroom models. Some really interesting new data here that I'm very happy to share on this webinar. And then, as I mentioned before, talk about these aspirations for digital learning. Where is this going? Do we have a shared vision as we move forward? Or what needs to happen to get us to that coveted place? So just to give you a little bit more background on the organization I represent and the Speak Up Research Project, in case you're not familiar with us. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Project Tomorrow. We are a globally recognized education nonprofit organization. We're laser focused on making sure that today's students are well prepared for the future. And we do that through research and evaluation studies, as well as some STEM education programs and advocacy around digital learning. We are most well known, however, for our Speak Up research project. And let me tell you a little bit about that. And once again, you may already be familiar. This is an annual research project that we started in 2003 to collect authentic, unfiltered feedback from K-12 students, teachers, parents, administrators, and community members. It was set up to be able to do two things at the same time. One, to be able to collect data from these stakeholders to inform national policy conversations, funding at the federal level and at the state level, to really stimulate new ways of thinking around digital learning. But its secondary goal, or really what we consider its primary goal, is as a service to schools and districts. So every year, Project Tomorrow creates new online surveys that we make available to any K-12 school or district that wants to use them to collect feedback from your own stakeholders. We give back to you a free report with all of your localized data and state and national data for benchmarking. And as I said, we use the national data, which I'll be sharing with you here in this presentation, to inform different policies, programs, and funding efforts. Since 2003, we've had about 4.5 million surveys that have been submitted through Speak Up. The data I'm going to be sharing with you today is from last fall. The Speak Up surveys were open from the beginning of October to about the middle of December, and during that time, schools and districts had access to use those surveys and to collect feedback from their own stakeholders. We collected about 505,000 surveys, as you can see here, from students, teachers and librarians, parents, all levels of administrators, as well as community members from about 7,800 schools and 2,600 districts nationwide, representing all 50 states. In addition to that, we had participation internationally from Department of Defense schools and also international schools that were interested in participating as well. The types of questions that are on the Speak Up survey are what you would imagine. They're about learning and teaching with technology. We asked different questions of different audiences. We asked all of the respondents to talk to us about how they are using different emerging technologies, both in the classroom and out of the classroom. And that may include mobile devices, social media tools, educational games. And we also look under that same conversation at many of these different new classroom models, and I did bring some of that data with us today. Now, as we go through here, and I'm sharing with you, obviously, the national data is what I'm going to be sharing. Think about how this data may be valuable for your school or district. If you had this information from your stakeholders, how could that possibly impact some of your plans and some of your programs as well? So let's dive in here, folks. We're going to start off with usage and role of digital content. Now, we think that this is pretty significant. At this point, 82% of district administrators say that their teachers are using some type of digital content or online resources regularly within classroom instruction. Now, there's obviously a wide spectrum associated with what types of digital content and online resources they may be using. We also have been tracking very closely very specific types of content. So, for example, district administrators now say that 40% of their teachers are using some type of digital game specifically in the classroom. We like to look at things longitudinally as well as during the particular survey year. And so as this particular slide shows you, we have seen quite a growth in teacher use of digital content just in the past 3 years. And my gut hunch here is that you're seeing the same thing in your schools and districts as well. So here we see pretty dramatic growth in the use of videos that teachers are finding online that they're bringing into their classroom. Lots of more interest in game-based learning environments and online curriculum, and even in online textbooks. So it's significant to think about this in terms of that changing mindset of the teachers to be able to using digital content more effectively. Now, when we disaggregate this further and look at the assignment of the teachers, we do see some differences. So, for example, game-based learning environments appear to be more popular in elementary grades than they are in middle school or high school. It looks like online textbooks have made a deeper penetration in middle schools and high schools at this point than in the much lower grades of the environment. And when we look at videos, which I mentioned before, we see very high numbers all the way across the board, with actually the highest numbers amongst middle school teachers. Now, this idea of videos is particularly interesting to us. So last year, we took our national pool of data, and remember we had about 40,000 teachers that participated with us last year in last year's surveys. And we looked specifically at those teachers that said they were using videos within their class instruction. And again, there's a wide spectrum in terms of how teachers are using videos. And we thought it would be interesting to take a look and ask those teachers specifically, how are you using the videos? For what instructional purpose are you using the videos? And we saw some really interesting things that we're going to be continuing to track over time. So whether it's introducing a lesson or unit, or to be able to facilitate a class discussion, or even an alternative to text-based class materials, we think that those are really interesting topics for further conversation. Now, here's a little question here. If folks want to play along, you could exercise your chat box opportunities here. In what class do you think students told us they were watching videos for learning? In particular, what subject area did middle school students say? So if you've got some ideas, you might want to put them in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and share the answer with you. You might be interested. In fact, and I see a couple coming in now, what middle school students, grades 6th, 7th, and 8th students told us, number one was science. We think that really has to do with a lot of the high quality content that is available. A lot of that, obviously, NASA is a good representation of that. Math was right after that, and then several folks mentioned social studies and history came right after that. So still high numbers all the way across the board, but we thought it was interesting that the students mentioned science, or maybe it was that the videos were most memorable for them in science. Now I see that Hildy from Arlington mentioned world languages. That actually, Hildy, was number 5 on the list, was world languages. We actually see some really interesting things in terms of not only the use of videos, but actually the use of digital content in particular in world language classes. We asked principals about how they're valuing the use of digital content. So what do you, Mr. or Ms. Principal, say are the primary benefits of using more digital content within instruction at your school? And as as I had alluded earlier, this idea of increasing student engagement was the #1 thing that the principals identified. I think there's a couple others that are worthy of note. This idea of extending learning beyond the school day. We're very interested obviously in making sure that students are well prepared for the future. And I hear all the time from principals and teachers that they wish there was more instructional time to be able to approach some of these goals. So we see here that principals are thinking about that use of digital content as solving that problem. Right here we see that 60% of principals said it's a way to personalize instruction and also to increase the relevancy and quality of the instructional materials. And then here, as the 5th one that I shared with you, this idea that the use of digital content could improve teachers' skills with technology is particularly interesting. It may not necessarily be based in fact, but there is a perception there that if there's more digital content available to teachers, they will become more familiar with using technology in general. We also asked principals, what challenges do you face using digital content within instruction or implementing digital content within instruction? And we thought it was particularly interesting to look at differences based on whether it was a principal of an elementary school, a middle school, or a high school that responded. And so we do see some significant differences here. When we think about equity issues within school districts, this is a really interesting slide to be able to inform any conversations you're having about equity or equitable distribution of resources. Here we see, for example, the #1 challenge for an elementary principal is providing enough technology to have that in the hands of the students, whether that is mobile devices or some types of carts where the students can have access to devices on a periodic basis. That's still a concern for middle school and high school principals, but less so, and it probably reflects the emphasis that many districts have placed to put the type of technology in the hands of their students in the upper grades versus the lower grades. We see some interesting trends also in terms of the location of appropriate digital content. How do I find things that align to our standards, to our curriculum, to what the needs are of our community? How do I evaluate the quality of digital content is increasingly an important conversation that we're having with principals and district administrators all the way across the board. To help address that on the Speak Up survey for the last couple years, we have been asking principals and teachers a very specific question as to how they are evaluating the quality of digital content that's being used in their classrooms. We asked them, what are the factors that determine quality for you? What are you using as your rubric for determining quality? Now, this is particularly interesting also when you think about the explosion of open education resources that are available and lots of the momentum around some of those solutions to the use of digital content. Now, a couple things are fascinating here on this particular set of data. I think one of the things that I always like to point out to folks is that principals and teachers come at this from some different perspectives. And so we see that right up front. So for principals, the idea that that content is research-based is the most important criteria. It's not the most important criteria for teachers. Not to say that teachers are minimizing that, but there's other things that are more important to the teacher. Now, to some extent, some of these differences make sense. So we see, for example, that the teachers are more interested than the principals in making sure that the content can be modifiable, that it was created by teachers, and that they got a referral from a trusted colleague. So if I am a 9th grade social studies teacher and I'm looking for some type of digital content, another ninth grade social studies teacher who I trust, maybe a colleague, maybe a peer, maybe someone I know, giving me that referral is more important to me than it might be from a principal's perspective on this. It's also interesting to see that there is a greater emphasis on the principal side for including teacher professional development with the digital content that's being used. So some really interesting trend lines here. This happens to be a question that we do every year, and so this would also be very, very interesting if you were to participate and speak up, and I know many of the folks that are here with us do participate and speak up regularly. If you were participating, to hear this type of a response from your teachers and from your principals so that you had an understanding of how to support their needs around digital content. So let's talk a little bit about new classroom models. Every year we ask different stakeholder groups, in this particular case, district administrators, school principals, teachers, and parents, how important is the use of digital tools in the preparation of students for future success? Is it extremely important? Is it just important? Or is it not important from your perspective? Now, the trend line here has been fascinating, folks, over the last couple of years. Increasingly, we see that district administrators, principals, and parents are landing on the side of extremely important. So you can see a lot of synergy there. The highest numbers are with the district administrators, where 2/3 of them say that digital learning is extremely important to the preparation of students for future success. Principals and administrators are very much in alignment. Teachers are still saying that digital learning is important, though they're not voting on that extremely important at this point. We'll talk a little bit more about that going forward, but this is another set of data that's really impacting the implementation side of digital learning in many schools and districts today. So we also asked parents about their thoughts around digital learning, and as I mentioned before, we know that increasingly they see it as extremely important. So a couple of interesting bits of information here that I thought would be interesting for you. And again, we disaggregate this data looking at parents from the age of their child. So the idea that tech use varies too much from teacher to teacher has been the #1 concern of parents when we've asked them about technology use at their child's school. In fact, folks, that transcends or exceeds parents' concern about data privacy, concerns about internet safety. So the idea that maybe I have a child who is in a 3rd grade class that is doing lots of innovative things using technology, and then just a couple weeks ago they started in on 4th grade, and that particular teacher was less comfortable with using technology, and so it's a totally different learning environment. Or at the middle school or high school level, maybe technology is being used effectively in science, but not so much in English. So we see that from parents as being a top challenge. We also know that parents are very keen on students using mobile devices and are very enthusiastic about blended learning. We actually shared with parents a definition of blended learning based on the Christensen Institute and asked them to respond, and we thought that was really interesting. We also asked parents, would you be willing to pay a tech fee, sort of like a sports fee or a band fee, depending upon the community, to enhance digital learning, to support digital learning in your community? Look at these numbers, folks. 2/3 of parents nationwide, even disaggregated by these student ages, said they'd be willing to support that. Now, we know that not all states actually allow that to happen, so it was sort of a provocative hypothetical question, but very interesting to underscore the importance that parents are placing on digital learning. Now, we asked district administrators, so what type of digital approaches are already demonstrating positive results in academic achievement in your district? What have you implemented that you're seeing those sort of results on? Digital content comes right up at the top, as right after that, online assessments. So 54% of district administrators told us that they have implemented digital content and are already seeing positive results. 28% said it's too early for results. We can see here how some of these other leading initiatives, the type of things that many of us are talking about, may still be in the too early stage to demonstrate actual results. And so we're going to be continuing to watch this as well. We asked students about what types of learning experiences they're having in their classrooms. And so it was interesting to also track this over time. And this is data from middle school students and high school students. So roughly close to just under 400,000 students nationwide that participate from middle school and high school. You can see the majority of them say that their class is a traditional class. That's where they meet every day with a teacher or during assigned periods. There might be some technology that's used as part of that, but it's not meeting the standards of a truly blended environment. You can see just around 30% of students said that's their experience, or flipped, or a fully virtual class. We asked principals about blended and competency-based classroom models last year. This was a really interesting new line of questioning, and of course we're all very interested to see what direction blended and competency-based education is going. So we see here that amongst principals, about 46% say they have some implementation of blended or competency-based in their classrooms. It may not be a fully structured blended program or a fully articulated competency-based learning program, but we are tracking that over time. We also saw, and we thought this was particularly interesting, that the principals that have implemented some type of blended or competency-based model within their school are also the type of principals that are interested in using student data to personalize instruction, and are also the same type of principals that are encouraging their teachers to use more digital content. So these things are not happening in isolation. In fact, there's almost a new profile of these more digital leaders in our principal ranks that are driving many, many of these efforts, and it's interesting to see their results. To follow through with that theme, and it was part of a new report that we released in June with Blackboard on digital learning trends, we took a look at those principals that said they've implemented blended learning, with the idea that maybe that profile is representing this new digital instructional leader in the schools. And we asked them about the benefits of blended learning models specifically. So you can see here on the left-hand side, they told us things such as extending beyond the school day, similar to what we heard from principals about digital content, the idea of personalization, their students are engaged, the idea of the students developing self-efficacy as successful learners. We thought all that was very, very interesting, but we also wanted to see if it differed by community type. So were those the experiences just of certain types of communities that have implemented blended learning, or are we seeing that across rural communities, suburban communities, urban communities? And so that's where we did the further disaggregation here. We do see that the highest numbers are coming in from principals in suburban schools, and that tracks very closely with the numbers that we see in terms of schools in suburban communities appear to be on the forefront in terms of implementing some of these new classroom models, particularly around flipped learning. But interesting to also note that it isn't as if there's a cliff that falls off. The principals in rural schools and urban schools that have implemented blended learning are seeing similar type results as well. And so that's another factor to keep in mind as we're doing further research. Now, I definitely wanted to share this with you here today because I think it also lends another perspective and takes us back to that student voice conversation where we started. We are seeing that students actually are using digital tools on their own outside of school, not as part of a school assignment, not as part of a teacher assignment, to actually self-blend their own learning experiences. So they're going out and they're finding videos to watch to learn how to do something. They're reading news stories or reports around topics that are of interest to them. In some cases, that impetus or that stimulus for that topic may have started in a classroom, but maybe it was a topic that was just very briefly covered as part of a unit. And so the students then are pursuing these types of things on their own to really learn more about these topics. And they're using digital tools. So to many extent, we're calling them self-blenders. This is verified by when we ask students about different types of learning modalities. We find that a majority of middle school and high school students say they actually do like learning when they can be in control of when and how they learn, really supporting that blended learning model right there at the get-go. Now, in terms of student access to technology in the classroom, outside the different types of classroom models, we also see some differences here in terms of whether students have access to mobile devices, whether they can use their own mobile devices, whether it's devices that are provided by their school or by their district, or are they still, their primary access to technology is in a media center, a library, or a lab, thus not as mobile as you might imagine. So we see some differences here. As you would expect, high numbers in terms of high school students that say they're using their own mobile device. Now, they may be using, of course, as we know, they may be using their own mobile device in class as part of a learning experience, or they may be doing some other things with their mobile device. We wanted to find out, as we do every year, in terms of what types of access students have to their own personal mobile devices. And so this is our data from last fall. This is always a very popular set of data. And in many cases, some of the districts and schools that participate with us are keenly interested in finding out from their stakeholders, from kindergartners all the way up through seniors in high school, what type of devices they actually have access to. This is really interesting data if a school or district is exploring the idea of a BYOD or BYOT environment, or they might want to know what sort of experiences their students have had with using different types of mobile devices. So there's lots of interesting things here. We're obviously beyond a tipping point in terms of middle school and high school students having access to a mobile internet-ready device that they can potentially use to support learning. The other thing, and it's hard to see here in this data, but we see it in other data, is that students don't have just one of these. They actually have multiples today, which is very interesting. So they may have, for example, they may have a smartphone. There may be a high school student that has a smartphone. They may have a laptop. They may also have a digital reader. Same thing with elementary students. As you can see, elementary students tend to be more likely to have tablets, in fact. And this, again, was data, not school-provided devices, but actually the own students' devices. So this is devices that are provided by mom, dad, grandma. And we had a question here that came in from Stacy. Thanks, Stacy. That's a great question. We do break this down by school demographics. And so we do see some differences there. In terms of middle school and high school students having access to a smartphone, though, we do not see any difference based on urban, rural, or suburban communities, Title I communities, or even majority communities, majority-minority communities. Sorry, I have a little tickle in my throat all of a sudden. What we find, though, is, of course, they may not be the same type of devices. So there's a wide range of different types of smartphone devices that are available today. Some have more functionality than others. But as far as being able to access the internet, it's very interesting to see that particularly amongst middle school and high school students, we don't see the demographic breakdowns that we maybe would expect to see, even with some of the other devices. Good question, Stacy. So we asked that 64% of high school students that say they use their own mobile device to support learning. So what are you doing with that mobile device to support learning, underlining to support learning? So we find that the students are doing a wide range of things. I'm sure you've seen these in classrooms as well, whether that's taking photos of assignments or textbook pages so they don't have to carry the books home. Using some different mobile apps. Talking with a lot of students this past year about mobile apps for organization, just to keep track of things, calendaring, assignment pages, those type of things, taking notes on a mobile device. This is one we're watching closely, folks. You may be as well. 15% of high school students last year told us that they text their teachers with questions as well. Now, my focus groups, I have the wonderful pleasure of doing about 30 to 40 focus groups a year with students all around the country, tell me that students are very keen on that idea. In fact, they want to use texting to replace raising the hand to ask the question. So could they text their teacher in the middle of a science lab or in the middle of a lecture or an instructional unit and be able to get a response back from the teacher? We'll see how that evolves over time. The students feel very strongly that every student should have access to a mobile device. As you can see here, 3/4 of middle school and high school students said it was important for students to have access to mobile devices during the school day. All right, so a little bit turning the page here to aspirations for digital learning. I'm going to start off talking about some of the valuation statements. So how do teachers value the use of technology? Remember, we started off talking about the fact that teachers definitely view the use of technology as important, but they're not necessarily on the same page as principals, district administrators, and principals in terms of thinking it as extremely important. So understanding a little bit more on the perspective of the teacher on this might be interesting for you. So teachers said that, the impact of digital tools on their own productivity was very important. So they gave them the opportunity to differentiate instruction, that they were able to facilitate and create different types of learning experiences for students, to give their students more personalized attention. We also asked them about the impact of digital learning on their students. So again, we see the engagement motivation coming in here as number one. Also this idea of personalization, so that the learning could be structured to better fit students' individual learning styles. And the idea of developing the types of college and career-ready skills that we're all particularly interested in. That the use of digital tools provided opportunities for students to collaborate more with each other. It gave them the opportunity to develop creativity skills, to apply knowledge, and develop critical thinking skills as they approach different types of problems. Now, we also asked the students themselves about how they value digital learning. Where did they see the big return on investment? So this is actually a fascinating question to have data from your own local students and then be able to compare that either within a district or statewide or with national data as well. So this is, again, national data. So what the students told us is it basically falls into 3 buckets. The use of technology helps them develop new skills, creativity, critical thinking being the 2 top ones that they mentioned. It also results in changed learning behavior. I think this is absolutely fascinating. The students told us where digital tools are used, they're more likely to complete homework. They feel that they're communicating with their teacher more often, and also because of that, maybe participating more in class discussions. So we thought that was really interesting in terms of some outcomes. And then also it was changing the way they were thinking about themselves as a learner. They enjoyed the opportunity to learn at their own pace, echoing what their teacher said. It gave them a way to fit their own learning style. And then, as we saw earlier, this idea of being in control of their learning was something that they highly valued. Now, the principals, when we asked them about the biggest challenge in terms of digital learning in general, so not specific to digital content or mobile learning or even classroom models such as blended learning, the principals continue to tell us it is that how do they motivate their teachers to change the way they're teaching? How do they motivate or support them in changing their instructional practices so that they can use these tools more effectively? Even in my focus groups with principals, this is the number one thing that principals want to talk about. How do we change the way we are teaching, and how do we support our teachers in that change process? So to help with that, we asked teachers, and again, this is nationwide data, what do you need to use digital content more effectively? So to directly answer the principal's questions there. So the teachers came up with this list. The idea of having mobile devices for every student to use, giving them planning time to work with colleagues, as well as professional development to support that planning and the use of the digital tools. The other thing that came up was increasingly this idea of consistent, reliable, high bandwidth internet access. 46% of teachers last fall told us that that was a critical thing that they needed to use digital content more effectively. Now, it's interesting because obviously many districts, some of you may be represented here, have made very significant investments over the last couple of years to change your infrastructure to be able to provide the sort of high bandwidth internet access. Now, what I'll say to folks is actually seeing that on this list, I think, is a really positive trend line. It means that the teachers are trying to use these tools, and maybe they're hitting some bandwidth barriers. It's actually a statement of increased demand. A couple of years ago when we asked this question, that particular response was nowhere on the radar screen. So it's very interesting to see from a trend standpoint the fact that as teachers are using the digital content more effectively, not only do they want more consistent, reliable internet access, but they're also increasingly concerned that their students do not have out-of-school internet access. And of course, that is what the homework gap conversation is all about. Now, we asked administrators, district administrators, what education efforts are you undertaking that you think have the greatest potential to improve student achievement? And right here, number one is this idea of improving teacher effectiveness. And very closely behind it is this idea of leveraging technology more. So this conversation around improving teacher effectiveness, helping teachers manage the change process around digital learning, getting them to feel more comfortable with learning these tools is obviously front and center. So we also, on the Speak Up survey every year, ask teachers what is their wish list for professional development. So last fall, teachers told us on their wish list was instruction around how to differentiate instruction. So they were looking for, how do I use these tools to personalize learning, to individualize learning, to make sure that every student has an opportunity to succeed. Teachers were also very interested in how to use games as part of the process, or how to use mobile devices and find mobile apps. Now, we did something different last year where we asked district administrators, so what are your priorities for professional development this year? And we see some match between teachers' wish list and district priorities, but then we also see some things that aren't there. So the fact that the number one wish list item that teachers had was around game-based learning environments has been a little bit of a wake-up call this past year for many districts who were not thinking that their teachers were ready for that. So I mentioned early on, when we think about the future of digital learning, a big part of that conversation is this idea of, do we have a shared vision going forward? Are all of our stakeholders on the same page? And so every year, actually since 2003, the Speak Up surveys have asked this question of the different stakeholder groups. We asked them to imagine if they had the opportunity, and this is students, parents, teachers, administrators, all the way across the board. If you had the authority to design the ultimate school for today's students, what type of technology do you think would have the greatest impact on learning? It's a fascinating question. It happens to be a favorite question of many district superintendents and school boards, because since we ask this question across different audiences and we give back to all the participating schools and districts their locally collected data, you have the opportunity to see if all of your stakeholders are on the same page. Now, as we talk about the trend of personalized learning, it's incredibly important to understand not only do we have a shared definition of personalized learning, but do we have a shared understanding of what type of tools could best support a personalized learning environment. So what I did for you here is that we took a look at a number of the different digital tools that we poll on. We actually poll on about 15, pulled a few of those out that support personalized learning, and then shared specific data from district administrators, school principals, parents, and high school students. As I said, it's a really interesting set of data to look at comparatively to see if your stakeholders are all on the same page. Are we thinking about the value of these different tools in the same way? So for example, if we look at online textbooks, so lots of different conversations around online textbooks and digital content and online content. I would say if I was a superintendent evaluating this data or a school board president evaluating this data, it would appear to me that our stakeholders are on the same page. There's a little bit of differentiation between principals and parents and students, but basically those lines are in alignment with one another. Those bars are in alignment with one another. That would make me feel comfortable about that. When we look at some of the other things, though, it's a little bit different. So we see, for example, that students are very interested in mobile apps for learning, but maybe we need to do a little bit more education with parents and principals to have them understand how mobile apps could actually help them with learning. Maybe we need to be thinking about that a little bit differently. So a very interesting set of data to think about the future of digital learning. So I hope I've given you some good information here to either stimulate new conversations or to think differently about some of your digital learning plans. I think one of the things that's most challenging today with where we are with digital learning is to think beyond what we think we see to really imagine what different types of learning environments should be. Now, if you're interested in more Speak Up data, it's obviously available on our website at tomorrow.org, and there's a wonderful set of reports and infographics there. Please take advantage of visiting us and having access to some of those reports and infographics. We did release a national report on May 5th on this data, some of which I shared with you here today, but much more in the report. In the report, we focused in on specifically on videos, games, animations, and simulations. So if you're interested in any of those areas, you might want to do a deeper dive into that report and see what the responses are from students, teachers, parents, and administrators. We also did 2 reports. I mentioned one of them earlier today that we released in June with our good friends at Blackboard, 2 new trends reports based upon the Speak Up 2015 data. One was particularly focused in on personalizing learning in America's schools. A fascinating report. You're going to want to take a look at this. It also is something that you can share with other people as well. And then we also did a special report for our first time on community engagement, looking at what the expectations are for parents for digital communication. Some really interesting new data there, and I know that we have several folks that represent communications responsibilities here with us today. And of course, right around the corner is Speak Up 2016. We are so pleased to be partnering with our good friends at Blackboard again on the Speak Up Research Project. Our surveys open up this year on October 12th. We will again have surveys for K-12 students as well as parents, teachers, librarians, district administrators, school site administrators, technology leaders, and community members, as well as communications officers. And so you can learn more. Come and visit us again at tomorrow.org or follow us on Twitter. We would love to have your school or district participate in Speak Up. And again, to underscore, a lot of the data that I shared with you here today will be available through a number of different sites, but it's also very interesting if you can get your own localized data so that you can take a look at that as well. So with that, Katie, I think we still have a little bit of time for some questions in case people have some questions. I tried to pick up a few of them while we were going through, but there might be a few additional questions as well.
Yeah, I think there are just a couple. I think you did answer quite a few of the questions as we went. Stacy Colvin had asked, do you break down this data by school demographics? And she'd enjoy seeing the research on that. I think you may have addressed verbally, but wanted to be sure.
I think I did. Yes.
Okay. And then Jenny Hubner asked, are the data from the Speak Up surveys publicly available, disaggregated?
So we put up a wide range of reports and infographics and presentations such as this, where we do disaggregate the data. And so looking at tomorrow.org, take a look at a lot of that. You'll see a lot of that there. If there is something in particular that you are interested in, Jenny, we can always disaggregate that for you as well. So if there is something that we didn't do the disaggregation for you, we are happy to do that as well. So you just need to visit us and contact us. And I'm going to give you my contact info as well so that you have that.
Thanks so much, Julie. All right, this has been excellent. As we're going forward with just the last couple of closing slides, please, I encourage you to add any additional questions or comments in the chat. I want to be sure that we're able to address all of them. We have a few minutes left, so don't be shy with the questions. But as we're waiting for more questions to come in, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. I know it's very difficult to take time out of your workday, especially as we're just back to school, and appreciate the live attendance very much. We're really excited to be able to offer continuing education units to participate in the series this year. For every 10 sessions you attend live, you can apply for one CEU through Virginia Commonwealth University. So we're really happy to offer that for live attendance only, and we do record all of the sessions for on-demand view after the session. So certainly understand when you can't participate. If you have any additional questions, Julie put her email in the chat. You can also reach out to me on Twitter or by my email. I can gather questions together to send them to Julie. But Julie, we do have one more question in the chat before we close out. A couple questions actually. So do you have data regarding the use of these technologies in higher education and teacher preparation professional development programs?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that question, Jenny. In fact, every other year, Speak Up does a special Speak Up for pre-service teachers. So we're collecting data from pre-service teachers, so college students in teacher preparatory programs all around the country, about what type of experiences they're having using different type of digital tools to support their learning, and how are they being prepared to use some of these different technologies for their future classroom. This year happens to be one of those years, and so we will be doing 2 iterations of our Speak Up for Tomorrow's Teachers. One will be here, a late fall implementation of the Speak Up surveys, again available to any college, school of education that would like to use them. That will be, as I mentioned, late fall for those programs that have December graduations, and then we'll be doing a second iteration, which will probably be the larger one, in spring 2017. We'll then be sharing out that data, which goes to answer some of the questions as to how are tomorrow's teachers being prepared to utilize different types of digital technologies to truly personalize learning, to implement different classroom models. A very interesting set. As I said, we've done this over the last couple years, and so we're particularly interested in seeing the change over time. Plus, it also is a really nice set of data for districts to understand what their pipeline looks like for those new teachers that are coming in as new hires in the following year. So a really interesting set. So you can find more information about that on our website as well, or again, feel free to contact me if you'd like some more information. But we think that's a really valuable part of our Speak Up franchise that we like to talk about.
And Julie, I'm not sure. There's a second question there, and you may have addressed it, but how much empirical research exists to satisfy the need for supporting data?
So I'm not sure I understand Stacy's question. I don't know if Stacy is.
I actually had the same question. Stacy, what does DA stand for? Or do you want to turn your mic on and just clarify the question a little further?
Or if Stacy wants to contact me directly, I'm happy to share some of our methodology and some of our thoughts about research that might exist even beyond what we have. I'm just wondering if that was what she was looking for.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, her mic isn't set up. She'll reach out to you directly, Stacy. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. And Julie, thank you, as always, for your wonderful presentation and just really compelling research that drives all of these questions and interests. So we really appreciate it. And I know this is going to be a highly viewed recording once we get it out there. So thank you so much. And thanks, everyone, for joining today.